The heavy autumn rain pelted against the glass windows of Café Lumière, creating streaks of water that looked like an unintentional abstract painting. Inside, the soft amber glow from pendant lights bathed the polished wooden tables in a warm, honeyed hue. Guests huddled beneath the awning, seeking peace and comfort amid the chilly downpour outside. Across the street, Alexander Mercer stood silently, eyes peering through the dense curtain of rain as he quietly observed the passion project he had once poured his soul into. 18 months had passed since he last stood here, though it felt like a lifetime. The cafe had once been the crown jewel in his restaurant empire, a place where impeccable service met unrivaled quality. But now, something felt off. Something vital had slipped out of place. 6 years ago, he had transformed this historic brownstone into a sanctuary for coffee lovers and nostalgia seekers alike. Every detail had been carefully considered, from exposed brick walls showcasing local artists' work, to handcrafted mahogany counters and a state-of-the-art kitchen hidden behind frosted glass panels. Back then, people lined up around the block just to get a perfect cappuccino. Now, the glow that once made this place special had all but faded. Behind Alexander stood Deanne, his loyal COO and the only person who knew his true identity. She sheltered under an umbrella, her silver hair neatly tied beneath a rain hat. Her voice broke the silence. "They won't recognize you." He stroked the unfamiliar beard on his face. Just another part of the new persona he was about to adopt. In the duffel bag at his feet sat a set of workman's coveralls, something he had never once worn in his 15 years as a business executive. "It's not just my appearance," Alexander murmured, eyes still fixed on the scene before him. 18 months. That's long enough for everything to change in ways you can't predict. Diane nodded, her voice laced with both empathy and concern. "That's why we need to do this. Complaints have doubled this quarter. Customer retention is down by 30%. Data only tells part of the story. We need to see the truth behind the numbers." A storm of emotions stirred in Alexander's chest. Disappointment, anger, and a deep sadness he couldn't quite name. Part of him still wanted to believe it was all just a misunderstanding. But when he saw a staff member behind the counter distracted by their phone, a spot that was once a battleground of excellence, his heart sank. The culture he had worked so hard to build was crumbling. This plan had taken shape during a late-night phone call while he was still in Southeast Asia, building orphanages, a project born from the life-changing experience of adopting his daughter, Lily. At first, the negative reviews seemed like smudges on an otherwise perfect canvas, but when longtime customers began reporting rude behavior and even mocking comments from staff, he knew something had fundamentally shifted. "The cameras, are they set up?" he asked, voice calm but heavy with intent. "All 12, just as you requested," Diane replied. "Audio and video feeds are securely linked to the main server. Only you and I have access." She handed him a small tablet. Everything he needed to uncover the truth was in that device. He tucked the tablet into his bag and nodded. Under the pretense of upgrading security after a string of downtown burglaries, no one had questioned the new installations. "They think you're the handyman hired to fix outstanding maintenance issues," Diane reminded him, a slight hint of concern in her tone. Alexander looked down at the work clothes one last time before stepping out from under the umbrella. Cold, wet, and uncertain, just like the journey he was about to undertake. "Then it's time for Ray Wilson, the maintenance man, to meet the team." Diane gave him a knowing smile, the kind that suggested she had seen this movie before. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic. Just remember, most of the current staff joined after you left. Your face is nothing more than a forgotten name to them." Alexander inhaled deeply. The rain soaked through his coat, chilling him to the bone. But inside, a fire burned bright, a determination to reclaim the soul of Café Lumière. The veteran employees, the ones who had been with the cafe from the start, had all been quietly reassigned to other branches for the next few weeks. Diane had handled it all with finesse, leaving no room for suspicion. Only Marcus, his first ever hire, and the bakery chef who'd been with him since day one, had shown a hint of concern when asked to train at the flagship location. "He'll understand when this is over," Alexander murmured to himself, more for reassurance than conviction. Still, the doubt lingered. There's no pain quite like watching someone you trust fall short. The light turned green. They crossed the street. Rain splattered rhythmically against the pavement, like drum beats heralding the moment of no return. Alexander felt a tightness in his chest, excitement, apprehension, and the surreal sensation of stepping into a play where he was both playwright and actor. He was entering his own cafe not as its founder, but as a stranger, a maintenance worker in disguise. Ironic that the man who once lit this place's flame was now walking back into its shadows to seek the truth. Diane leaned in and whispered one final note. "Remember your Ray. 20 years of experience, known for fixing the things no one else can. You know nothing about management. Just a hire I made to handle maintenance." Alexander nodded, hunched slightly, and let his voice soften. "Just another working man. Nothing more, nothing less." The doorbell chimed. It used to be a signal for a warm welcome. A ritual Alexander had personally trained his team to uphold. Today, it was just a noise, ignored by all. Two baristas continued giggling at something on their phones, barely acknowledging his presence. Diane cleared her throat, loudly. Still, no reaction until a young woman with turquoise-dyed hair looked up, plastered on a forced smile. "Welcome to Café Lumière. What can I get started for you? We're not here for drinks, so..." Diane replied, glancing briefly at the woman's name tag. "I'm Diane Parker, operations manager. We spoke on the phone about the maintenance issues." Recognition flickered across Zoe's face. "Oh, right. The leaking ceiling in the back room, and the thermostat problem, and a few other things," Diane confirmed. "This is Ray Wilson. He'll be handling repairs over the next few weeks." Alexander extended a calloused hand, hardened from years of volunteer labor abroad, and offered a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, miss. I'll just be working quietly in the background, fixing whatever needs fixing." Zoe shook his hand briefly, already glancing back at her phone. "Sure, whatever. Jessica's the shift manager. She's in the back office. I'll give Ray the tour," Diane cut in. "He needs access to the kitchen, break room, everything." "Yeah, staff only is through that door," Zoe replied lazily, gesturing vaguely before hurrying back to the counter. As they moved deeper into the cafe, Alexander observed quietly, the eyes of a father searching for signs of the child he once raised. The music blaring overhead was far louder than the carefully calibrated volume he once mandated. The pastry display was disorganized, no attention to detail. A table near the window sat dirty, crumbs and coffee rings untouched, even though the guests had left long ago. "It's the little things," he muttered to himself. "It always is," Diane whispered back. In the service industry, decline rarely arrives in a crash. It slips in, inch by inch, through 100 tiny compromises. Their introduction to Jessica, mid-30s, sharp gaze, cold demeanor, was no different. She handed Ray a master key without a glance at the work order, her attention already back on the screen filled with spreadsheets. So much had changed, but the reckoning was just beginning. "Just don't interfere with business operations," she said, already turning back to her spreadsheets. By late afternoon, Ray, the man who once sat in the CEO's chair, had fully blended into the background, as if he were part of the walls. He worked slowly and methodically, addressing each real issue on the maintenance list. The repair skills he had developed during years of humanitarian work had become invaluable in maintaining his cover, but more importantly, he was there, present, at the heart of Café Lumière, witnessing every expression, every word, every invisible gap between staff and customer. that no one else seemed to notice. Outside, the rain still fell steadily, each drop like a heartbeat, a quiet reminder that truth was never found in financial statements, but in these everyday moments, where culture was forgotten and the soul of a brand quietly cracked apart. But Alexander began noticing a troubling pattern in how the front-of-house staff served customers. The warmth and fairness that once defined Café Lumière were gone. Now, customers were silently sorted. Those who looked wealthy or important received prompt, albeit cold, service. Meanwhile, more modest guests were made to wait longer, often greeted with indifference or impatience. While fixing a loose floorboard near the condiment station, Alexander overheard a conversation that made his stomach knot. "She's back again," muttered one tall female employee, nodding toward an elderly woman slowly making her way to the counter. "Takes her 15 minutes to order a cup of tea," replied the other, sounding utterly bored. "Just smile and nod. She tips well if she thinks you're really listening to stories about her grandkids." Alexander clenched the hammer in his hand. That woman was Mrs. Abernathy, a loyal customer since the day the cafe opened. She had been one of the first to support his dream. Her late husband, a gifted architect, had helped design the cafe's interior, free of charge, because he believed in the vision of a young man with a bold dream. This wasn't just disrespect. It was betrayal of the very soul Café Lumière once stood for. Alexander hammered the nail harder than necessary, trying to quiet the rising fury in his chest. But this moment was why he came back. He needed to see it all with his own eyes, unfiltered by titles or reputation. As the afternoon wore on, Alexander collected more reasons for concern. A barista gave a customer lactose-free milk they hadn't requested, then rolled her eyes when asked to remake the drink. Another seated a family with young kids next to the restroom, despite better tables being available. Each misstep, small on its own, added up to a clear picture, one that explained why customer satisfaction was plummeting. As closing time neared, the rain outside intensified, wind whistling through the door frames like the building itself was sighing. Alexander stood on a stool, adjusting a flickering light above the entrance, when the front door swung open. A cold gust blew in, carrying with it the image of a small figure that made Alexander freeze. A young girl, no older than 11, stood at the entry mat. Her long black hair clung to her face, her purple jacket soaked and heavy. Despite her fragile appearance, her eyes were steady with quiet determination. In her hand, she gripped a damp napkin like it was something precious. Alexander paused, watching as she walked slowly to the counter. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few customers hunched over laptops and books, lost in their own worlds. She waited patiently. Zoe, the blue-haired barista, later called barista, Blake Zaharis, bowed. "Names she je hola vira maisimuki ispak." He greeted, brusquely, and oxygen tanked. "Please explain more." Discontent, Blake thought. But he didn't doubt him. The girl didn't speak. Instead, she carefully placed the crumpled napkin on the counter, smoothed it flat, and slid it forward. Her movements were precise, almost ceremonial. Alexander moved closer, pretending to grab a tool, eyes discreetly scanning the napkin. In neat, childlike handwriting, it read, "I don't hear well. I'd like a hot chocolate with whipped cream, thank you." Zoe picked up the napkin, her expression shifting, perhaps to discomfort or mild amusement. She raised her voice, unnecessarily loud, speaking slowly like to someone who couldn't understand basic language. "You want hot chocolate with whipped cream, right?" Alexander frowned. The girl simply nodded, her calm demeanor unshaken. She reached into a small coin purse, counted out exact change, and placed it gently on the counter. Zoe turned away to prepare the drink, but Alexander noticed her shoulders shaking slightly. She whispered something to a co-worker who had just emerged from the kitchen. They both looked at the girl and chuckled. like her courage was something to be mocked. Alexander froze. A part of him wanted to rip off the disguise and confront them right there, but he resisted. To truly heal a sickness, he needed to see the symptoms completely. This was only the surface. The girl stood quietly, waiting for her hot chocolate as if the laughter behind her didn't exist. Occasionally, she brushed raindrops from her hair that had trickled onto the counter. A swell of emotion rose in Alexander's chest, a tight, aching feeling he couldn't shake. There was something about her posture, her quiet resilience, that reminded him of Lily. His daughter, once a silent figure in an orphanage, had looked at the world with those same eyes. He picked up his toolbox a bit too forcefully, causing Zoe to flinch. He pretended not to notice, disappearing into the back room. Day one of his undercover mission was coming to an end, and already what he'd seen was darker than any report could have warned. He tucked away his tools, eyes drifting to the tablet in his bag. The cameras had captured everything, but tomorrow, the break room, the unguarded conversations. Tomorrow would be the real test. What he didn't know yet was that this moment with the silent girl and her rain-stained napkin would be the catalyst. A spark that would ignite a reckoning, not just for his staff, but for Alexander himself, and the pain he had kept buried for years. Zoe handed the girl her hot chocolate with an exaggerated bow and an overacted smile. The girl accepted it with both hands, offering a sincere smile in return, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. She walked to the corner table by the window, the same one she had likely chosen before, and sat silently. Rain streaked down the glass beside her, and she sipped the hot chocolate slowly, as though it were her reward for bravery. Alexander knelt beside a wobbly chair near the staff entrance, tools in hand, but his eyes remained on her. Maybe it was her posture, the tidy way she kept her things, or simply the way she navigated a world that never truly listened. Whatever it was, she reminded him of Lily. That same ache of empathy and restrained fury pulsed inside him. The cafe had nearly emptied out. Just 2 laptop users and the girl remained. As closing time approached, Alexander felt his patience wear thin. The girl finally stood to leave. She tidied her table, stacking the cup, wiping down the surface with a napkin, carefully restoring the space better than she found it. She returned to the counter, offered a small wave goodbye, silent but full of grace, and walked out into the rain. This time, she carried an umbrella, and still, she closed the door behind her without a word. The moment the door closed behind her, laughter sliced through the quiet like a knife. "Oh my God, did you guys see that girl?" Zoe burst out laughing, leaning against the counter, clearly pleased with herself. Why didn't she just order through the app like a normal person? Trevor, the lanky new hire, grabbed a napkin and pretended it was an order slip. Then, in a mocking, distorted voice, he imitated her. "I want hot chocolate with whipped cream, please." Alexander froze. It felt like the blood had stopped flowing in his veins. He gripped his screwdriver so tightly his knuckles turned white. And then, as if to throw gasoline on the fire, Jessica, the shift manager, walked out from the office. But instead of shutting down the cruelty, she smirked and added, "Probably didn't hear us, right? But I mean, even if you're deaf, you still know how to type on a phone, don't you?" None of them noticed the man slipping silently into the adjacent storage room. The door left slightly ajar. From the narrow opening, Alexander had a clear line of sight into the break room, where employees in Café Lumière uniforms were gathering, and the truth about the cafe's culture was beginning to reveal itself. "What's so funny?" asked a barista with a high ponytail, who had just emerged from the kitchen. Zoe grinned slyly and pulled out her phone. "Our favorite little customer, that sweet girl with the napkin. She comes in every week, writes the exact same note," Trevor chimed in. "Like, okay, we get it, you don't hear well," Jessica added with what she seemed to think was a helpful clarification. "She's not fully deaf. She talks sometimes, but good luck understanding her." Alexander no longer felt disappointed. He felt betrayed. Not just on behalf of the girl, but on behalf of the mission, the philosophy, and the heart he had once poured into this place. And now, One thing was certain: tomorrow, everything would change. Napkin is actually an upgrade, Trevor joked. The words hit like a slap in the face to every core value Alexander had built his company on. He stood motionless, rage burning just beneath the surface. These were the people he paid to make every customer feel welcome. And here they were, turning a child's difference into a punchline. "Check this out," Trevor said, stepping into the center of the break room like he was preparing for a performance. "I call this one, the Napkin Girl Orders Pizza." He hunched his shoulders, twisted his hands in exaggerated, meaningless gestures, and began making garbled, guttural sounds, an offensive parody of sign language. Zoe doubled over with laughter, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, do the voice again," she begged, gasping between laughs. Trevor launched into another round, worse than before, this time stumbling around like he was physically impaired. "I want to pepet, yeah, please." He slurred each word, turning the effort of speech into a cruel joke. "Comedy gold," the ponytailed barista declared, pulling out her phone to record the scene. "Get my good side," Trevor said, laughing, continuing his performance with gleeful cruelty. Alexander remained frozen behind the cracked door of the storage room. Every laugh, every insult was a stab to the heart. These people weren't just mocking a child. They were turning her disability into entertainment. They were killing the soul of Café Lumière with every callous joke. "Comedy hour," the ponytailed barista cheered, finishing her recording. "This is gonna go viral in our secret barista group. Just make sure it doesn't leak to the public," Jessica said with a smile, offering a half-hearted warning instead of ending the behavior. Zoe scoffed. Like anyone would recognize her anyway. The topic shifted to other things as a young man, presumably Darren, poked his head into the break room to announce his arrival for the night shift. One by one, the staff began to disperse. Jessica and Amber packed up to leave, while Zoe and Trevor stayed behind to close the cafe. Alexander hadn't moved. His body was tight with fury, eyes blazing, lips pressed into a pale, rigid line. It had been years since he felt this level of rage. Every second of that cruel scene had been captured, clear, indisputable, by the cameras he himself had installed. He didn't just feel betrayed, he felt robbed. Robbed of the business he built, robbed of the culture he once cultivated, by the very people who were meant to protect it. That girl, with her neatly written note on a rain-soaked napkin, her gentle eyes and her heartbreaking patience, had been treated like a joke, a thing to laugh at, a difference to be mocked. As the cafe emptied of customers, Alexander slipped out of the storage room, moving like a shadow. The first thing he needed to do was review the footage, every second of it, to make sure nothing was missed. The second, retrieve that napkin, not just as evidence, but as a symbol. The temporary apartment he had rented under the name Ray Wilson was just 2 blocks away. He had insisted on the proximity, despite Diane's urging that he stay in his luxurious penthouse. But tonight, comfort was the last thing on his mind. He sat at the tiny kitchen table, propped the tablet against a coffee mug, and hit play. The footage was heartbreakingly clear. He watched every frame. Trevor's grotesque performance, Zoe's laughter, Amber recording, Jessica doing nothing. Every detail, every expression. Alexander closed his eyes, massaging his temples as a sharp headache formed behind them. He rewound, paused, Trevor mid-gesture, face twisted into a mockery of a language meant to bridge silence. "Bastards," Alexander whispered, voice thick with emotion. Outside, the rain drummed steadily against the windows, nature's soft percussion to the fury building inside him. He stood, pacing the length of the room. 5 steps there, 5 steps back, like a caged animal. This wasn't about customer service anymore. This was about basic human decency. His phone buzzed, a message from Diane. "How was day 1?" He typed back. "Worse than we thought. I need that napkin from the deaf girl." Her reply came immediately. "Already on it." Jessica filed it with the receipts. I'll get it before shift change tomorrow morning. He set the phone down and returned to the footage, fast-forwarding to the final scene. The girl, quiet and alone, carefully wiped her table clean after finishing her drink. She turned back to the counter, waved goodbye. No one waved back, and stepped into the rain, still gentle, still composed. Something in the way she moved, cautious, modest, dignified, tightened his chest. That girl, she wasn't just a customer. She was Lily. She was every moment he'd fought to protect, every silent cry he'd promised to answer when he took Lily in from that orphanage. But in that moment, Alexander knew. He could not forgive, not the crew, not the failure, and certainly not himself, if he did nothing about it. Alexander opened his wallet in the silence of the small apartment. Amid old bills and scattered papers was a worn photograph. Him and Lily on her 16th birthday, taken just days before he left for his extended sabbatical. In the photo, Lily beamed as she held up her acceptance letter from Gallaudet University, a prestigious institution dedicated to students who are deaf or hard of hearing. He sat quietly under the soft yellow glow of the kitchen light, eyes locked on that radiant smile. That girl yesterday, she could have been you, he whispered, a familiar ache blooming in his chest. It wasn't just the image of the deaf girl that stirred his memory. It was the unmistakable reflection of Lily from years ago, when she was 12, returning home in tears after classmates mocked her speech. For months, Lily had gone silent. Despite having a cochlear implant, she refused to speak, retreating entirely into sign language, her safe harbor. It had taken years of therapy, patience, and unwavering support to rebuild her confidence, something that thoughtless cruelty could dismantle in a matter of minutes. Alexander turned back to the tablet. His gaze no longer held passive concern. It burned with a fire that would not be extinguished. He methodically recorded every inappropriate action from the staff involved, not missing a single detail. But this wasn't just about terminations or punishment. It was about dissecting the toxic roots of a culture that had rotted the heart of a brand he once built with pure passion. That night, Alexander sent 3 messages, one to the legal team requesting an emergency meeting the following morning, one to HR, demanding complete files on every current employee, and one to his tech team, asking them to compile the surveillance footage from that day into one seamless recording. He didn't sleep. Every attempt to rest was overtaken by the words he kept rehearsing in his mind for the moment when he would confront them all. A part of him wanted to march into the cafe immediately, rip off the disguise and call them out on the spot. But another part, the strategist who had built an empire, knew that timing was everything. The storm had to hit at just the right moment to wash everything clean. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear after days of relentless rain, but Alexander's mood remained dark. He put on the worn work clothes, clipped the Ray Wilson name tag onto his chest for the final time. Under that identity, he would see this performance through to its end. Diane was waiting outside the cafe. When he approached, she handed him a slim envelope. "I've got it, and I've scheduled the staff meeting for tomorrow morning. Just like you asked." Alexander opened the envelope. Inside was the crumpled napkin, slightly stained with chocolate, but the handwriting was still intact. "I don't hear well. I'd like a hot chocolate with whipped cream, thank you." He stared at the little smiley face the girl had drawn, a simple gesture of kindness to people who had returned her sincerity with cruelty. His hand tightened slightly around the paper. Emotion surged inside him, too powerful for words. Diane noticed the change in his expression. "Ray," she said gently, "remember who you are today." Alexander nodded, forcing his face to relax, assuming once again the calm, weathered expression of Ray the handyman. "Today, I observe. Tomorrow, they'll learn exactly who I am." That entire day, Alexander worked like a machine, tightening screws, replacing light bulbs, adjusting vents, but his eyes missed nothing. Every whisper between Zoe and Trevor, every chuckle, cut a little deeper. Every time Jessica checked her phone, he wondered if she was watching the mocking video from the night before. By evening, the slow-burning anger inside him had cooled, not disappeared, but sharpened, icy and precise. He made one final adjustment to a shelf near the register, watching as the last few customers filtered out. In less than 12 hours, Ray the handyman would disappear, and Alexander Mercer, the founder of Café Lumière, would return, no longer hidden behind any mask. He packed away his tools for the final time. His hand brushed against his shirt pocket where the napkin remained, carefully preserved. A simple request for a hot chocolate with cream had become the symbol of everything that needed to change. Tomorrow, all masks would fall, and from that napkin a revolution would begin. The sun rose over the city, casting golden light on streets freshly scrubbed by rain. It was the clearest morning in weeks, but for Alexander Mercer there was no peace. Today was not a day for calm. Today, the truth would be revealed, and the soul of Café Lumière would be judged. He was no longer Ray Wilson, the hunched handyman with a raspy voice. Today, he was himself again. The owner, the founder, the man behind a once-celebrated cafe chain known for its exceptional hospitality. His charcoal suit was immaculately tailored, his beard neatly trimmed. On his wrist gleamed the platinum cufflinks Lily had given him the day his company went public. He stood in front of the cafe, adjusting his jacket, not for vanity, but to remind himself there would be no softness today. Diane waited inside, a silent but unwavering commander. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly as he entered. Alexander nodded, his face unreadable. "The projector is set up in the main dining area. All the footage is cued," she said, handing him a remote, a symbol of the complete control he now held. "All you have to do is press play." One by one, the staff arrived. Jessica came first, followed by Zoe and Trevor. Amber arrived last, almost 10 minutes late, fixing her ponytail as she walked in. None of them understood what was happening. The usual tables were gone, replaced by a semicircle of chairs facing a white projection screen. "Good morning," Diane said firmly. "Please, take a seat. We're waiting on one last person." "Is this a health inspection thing?" Trevor mumbled through a yawn, looking around. Before anyone could answer, the door opened. Alexander stepped in. The reaction was immediate. Jessica froze, her eyes going wide as she recognized the face from the employee handbook. Zoe and Trevor looked at each other stunned. Amber, still on her phone, barely glanced up. "Good morning," Alexander said, his voice calm, measured, each word slicing through the air. Amber finally looked up, her expression hardening as she realized who stood before her. "For those who don't recognize me," Alexander continued, "I'm Alexander Mercer. I own Café Lumière and 16 other locations across the country." Silence swallowed the room. Alexander walked slowly to the front, standing beside the screen. "What you might not know," he said, "is that for the past 2 days I've been working alongside you as Ray Wilson, the handyman." Jessica's face turned ghost white. Trevor's jaw dropped. Zoe gripped the sides of her chair. Amber frowned, clearly confused. "No way." Ray looked way older, and his back was all hunched, she started. "A few changes in posture and voice," Alexander replied. He stood tall. "But I'm not here to talk about my performance. I'm here to talk about yours." He pressed the button. The screen lit up. The first images appeared, of the deaf girl walking into the cafe, handing over her napkin, patiently waiting as Zoe prepared her drink. A young customer, ordering a simple beverage. "Seems harmless, doesn't it?" Alexander said quietly. "But let's keep watching." The footage shifted to the break room. The audio played clearly. Laughter, mockery, Trevor's crude imitation of sign language, Zoe's howling laughter, Amber filming on her phone, and Jessica, the manager, doing nothing but smirking. The room sat in silence. No one laughed now. Alexander said nothing more. He let the footage play all the way through, giving each person a chance to confront their own reflection on the screen. Zoe covered her mouth. Trevor stared down at the floor. Jessica sat stiffly, frozen in place. Amber kept fiddling with her phone, until Diane calmly but firmly walked over and took it from her hands. When the video ended, Alexander stood in silence, a silence so heavy it felt like a verdict. "Does anyone care to explain?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a storm waiting to erupt. No one responded. "No?" He stepped forward, eyes sweeping across the room. "Then allow me. What you just watched wasn't poor customer service. It was cruelty. Willful, targeted cruelty aimed at a child who just wanted a cup of hot chocolate." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the napkin, holding it up. "This wasn't just an order. This was a symbol of trust. That little girl placed her vulnerability in your hands, and you repaid her with ridicule." He walked slowly, stopping in front of Jessica, the one he once believed had leadership potential. From his wallet, he pulled out a photo. Lily, beaming as she held her college acceptance letter. "This is my daughter, Lily. She's currently studying neuroscience at Gallaudet University, a school for the deaf and hard of hearing. She used to be that little girl, and she too was mocked. She spent months in silence because the world decided that being different was a joke." Alexander looked at each bowed head. "You didn't just betray that girl. You betrayed the name on the sign outside. Lumiere. Light. Today, I'm bringing that light back, even if it means starting by clearing out the darkness within my own team." He paused, glancing down at the napkin as though he could still see Lily in the outline of that smiling face. "That girl. She used to be my daughter." Jessica passed the photo to Zoe, and for the first time, tears welled in the blue-heeled barista's eyes. Not from fear of being fired, but from the crushing realization that she had been part of something crueler than a mistake, careless inhumanity. "The girl you mocked, her name is Emma Richardson. She's 12, and she's one of the top students in the scholarship program I created in Lily's name." The room was completely still. Their program exists to support hearing-impaired students with outstanding academic potential, despite the barriers society places in their way. Barriers that people like you reinforce every single day. A quiet sob escaped Zoe, but Alexander continued. "I built this cafe and this entire brand on respect, inclusivity, and a culture of embracing difference. While I was across the world building schools for children with disabilities, the people I trusted destroyed that foundation. Not because you lacked skill, but because you lacked empathy." He turned, his voice sharpening. "Jessica, Trevor, Amber, your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Diane will process your final pay." Zoe choked back a breath, head bowed low. Alexander gave her a moment before speaking again. "Zoe, you're suspended for 2 weeks without pay. During that time, you'll complete 40 hours of community service at the Richardson School for the Deaf. Whether you return will depend entirely on their evaluation of your attitude and performance." Amber shot to her feet, face flushed with rage. "We didn't even say anything to her face. It was just a joke. You can't fire us for something like that." Alexander turned to her, voice calm, but every word cutting like steel. "Actually, I can. Your employment contracts contain a very clear clause requiring adherence to our company values. Mocking a disabled child on company property and on camera is a gross violation. The consequence is immediate dismissal." "It's that simple." Trevor sat frozen, as if just remembering the worst part. "Amber, that video you filmed, you sent it to the baristas at other locations." "We know," Diane interjected, stepping forward, her voice resolute. "The tech team has already issued takedown requests to every device that received it. And Amber," she turned to the ponytailed girl, "sharing bullying content on an internal platform not only violates company policy, it places you on our blacklist. You are barred from employment at any Café Lumière location nationwide." For the first time, Jessica spoke, her voice trembling. "Mr. Mercer, I take full responsibility. I was the shift manager. I should have stopped it." Alexander didn't flinch. "You should have. Because leadership isn't about schedules and inventory. It's about setting a standard, about shaping the moral compass of your team. And you failed. Completely." Zoe hid her face in her hands, her blue hair falling forward like a curtain. "I didn't mean to. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I thought it was just a joke. And if you knew she was connected to me," Alexander cut in, his voice colder than before, "would you have still laughed? If her parents had been sitting nearby, would you have mocked her then? But that's not the point. The point is, you did it to anyone, under any circumstance." Silence settled over the room again, this time not from fear, but from the weight of realization. Outside, the cafe's opening hour had come and gone. The closed sign still hung in the window, as if declaring, "Today we don't serve coffee. Today we serve truth." Alexander drew a breath, stepping into the center of the room. "I want to share something with you." His voice softened, not sharp now, but deep, resonant, like a bell struck gently. "When I adopted Lily, she was 8. She had already spent years in a system that failed her. Teachers who didn't try, classmates who didn't care, adults who laughed instead of listened. She didn't stop speaking because she couldn't. She stopped because no one had earned the right to be spoken to." He looked around the room once more, and yesterday I saw another little girl standing in front of that same kind of silence. But unlike Lily, she didn't have anyone to stand up for her. No one spoke. No one intervened. He gently squeezed the napkin that had become a symbol of everything he once believed in. "So today I'm speaking. I will not let kindness be trampled, not even by people who once worked for me." Alexander raised his head, his voice no longer cold but heavy with grief. "Emma was once mistaken for having cognitive delays, simply because she couldn't hear well. She was bullied, not just by children, but by adults. Adults who were supposed to protect her." He paused, "But starting today, she won't face that alone." No one in the room dared move. Even Amber stopped fidgeting. Silence had settled like a heavy blanket, each person now left to face not just Alexander, but their own conscience. "The day I brought Lily, my daughter, home for the first time, she didn't speak for almost 24 hours. Not a word, not a sign. She didn't believe in kindness, because what the world had taught her was this: kindness always comes with a price, that if someone is nice to you, it's only a matter of time before they turn around and laugh at you." Alexander paused, his eyes shining with pain, though his voice never faltered. "It took years, years of therapy, years of unconditional hugs, years of repeating one simple truth: you don't have to be like anyone else. Only then did I help her begin to believe in herself again." He looked directly at each person in the room. "Do you understand what I'm saying? When you mock someone for being different, even behind their back, you reinforce a system that tells them you're not worthy. You don't matter." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Jessica hid her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Trevor stared down, fingers intertwined, unable to look up. Alexander took a deep breath and straightened his suit jacket, a subtle gesture signaling the turning point. The directly in the mockery: "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Zoe, your suspension starts today. The rest of the team will be evaluated individually over the coming days." Diane quietly handed each person an envelope containing their formal termination letters. Jessica, Trevor, and Amber took them like sentencing notices, their hands trembling, their feet leaden. Alexander continued, his voice no longer a judgment, but a truth. "Let this be known. Your actions today will bring about change across the entire company. More training, clearer consequences, stronger oversight. You've lost your jobs, but that might just prevent someone else from being hurt tomorrow." Each one left the room like shadows, Amber didn't argue. She clutched her letter, eyes wide and lost. When only Zoe remained, Alexander turned to her. His voice had softened but held firm. "Your community service starts at 9 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. I've already spoken with the director at Richardson's school. They'll be expecting you." Zoe nodded, wiping away tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Mercer. I didn't think about the consequences, and that's exactly the problem," Alexander replied, eyes reflecting not anger now, but sorrow, for her and for everyone who had ever been on the receiving end of such cruelty. "We don't think about how our words, our jokes, our actions affect those who live in a world that wasn't built with them in mind. Hopefully this time, you won't forget that." Zoe gave a quiet thank you before leaving the room in complete silence, save for the lingering presence of something that had just been mended. Alexander sank into a chair, loosening his tie, leaning back like a man who had just come through a war not of fists, but of hearts. "That was harder than I expected," he exhaled. "You did what needed to be done," Diane replied gently. "The culture here was rotting. Sometimes you have to clear it all out before you can rebuild." Alexander looked down at his hand, still holding the napkin. Emma's handwriting was still visible, and that little smiley face she had drawn, like a gift for people who never deserved it. "Call Richardson's school," he said after a moment. "I want to speak with Emma and her family." Then he stood, eyes glinting with quiet resolve. "We begin hiring today. This cafe opens in 3 days, with an entirely new team and a very old promise: to respect people exactly as they are." Diane nodded and began tapping notes into her tablet. "And the napkin?" she asked softly. Alexander closed his fingers around it and looked toward the window where the morning sun streamed in. "It stays with me, as a reminder that if we forget what truly matters, then everything else is just an empty shell." 6 weeks later, Café Lumière was unrecognizable. Alexander stood by the front window, watching customers stream in. They were greeted with genuine smiles, served with respect, and left feeling like they'd just been part of something more meaningful than just a good cup of coffee. Behind the counter were all new faces, people chosen not just for skill, but for a real commitment to compassion and understanding. Every employee had gone through a rigorous interview process, personally overseen by Alexander, not just to find the right fit, but to rebuild the soul Café Lumière had once lost. The space had changed too. Not loud or flashy, but thoughtful and intentional. A small display near the register showed common ASL coffee orders. The digital menus now included large text and simplified descriptions for guests with accessibility needs. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," Elena, the new manager, called out while guiding her team with confidence and warmth. She had once run a cafe known for its top-tier hospitality, and now she was the new heart of Lumière. "Our new pastry chef started today. He specializes in gluten-free recipes that actually taste amazing." "Excellent." Alexander nodded, satisfied, as he watched everything move in harmony, like a symphony composed anew. "All team members completed their initial diversity training," Elena continued, "and the Richardson School team returns next week for an advanced session on inclusive communication strategies." Alexander nodded, his gaze landing on a special corner near the register. There, inside a simple black frame behind non-reflective glass, was Emma's napkin. Beside it, engraved in elegant lettering, "Kindness is the loudest voice." It wasn't just a new motto. It was printed on coffee cups, stitched into staff aprons, and slowly becoming the soul of an entire system. The transformation hadn't come easy. After firing the entire previous shift team, Alexander had shut down the cafe for 5 full days. An unprecedented move that drew attention from customers and local media. But instead of hiding, he had been transparent. A public statement read, "We don't correct mistakes in the dark. We change in the light." Since then, the Richardson School had become more than a partner. They were now a cornerstone of Lumière's rebirth. Weekly ASL coffee hours were hosted here, and students from the school's vocational program were given meaningful work opportunities. "Mr. Mercer," Diane called softly, walking in with two familiar figures, Emma and her mother Sarah Richardson, the principal and founder of the school. "Sorry we're late. End-of-term evaluations ran a little long," Sarah said, shaking his hand. "No trouble at all." Alexander smiled, bowing slightly to Emma, who now stood taller, more assured, worlds apart from the girl who once clutched a wet napkin at the register. The girl from that rainy day was no longer timid. Emma's eyes now held confidence, her posture firm, like a bamboo shoot that had just weathered its first winter. "You're right on time," Alexander said. "The new training materials you recommended arrived this morning." Emma had already noticed the framed napkin. She gently tugged her mother's sleeve and signed rapidly with her free hand. Sarah smiled and translated. "She says it feels a little strange to see her handwriting on the wall, but she really loves the quote next to it." Alexander crouched slightly to meet Emma's gaze. "Your napkin changed this place," he said gently, then signed the words he'd practiced for weeks. "Thank you." Emma's face lit up. She signed back, fluid, confident, and graceful like a flowing stream. Sarah translated. "She says your signing has gotten better, and she wants to know, is Lily coming today?" Alexander shook his head gently, speaking while signing simply. "She's presenting her thesis at university today. But she asked me to give you this." He handed Emma a small envelope. Inside was a photo of Lily, standing proudly in front of her research poster, and a handwritten note. Emma read it slowly, her lips quivering slightly. Her expression shifted from solemn to radiant. Alexander, watching her with quiet curiosity, asked, "What did she say?" Sarah unfolded the note and read aloud. "Dear Emma, my dad told me what happened at the cafe. Your bravery in the face of ignorance reminded me of something I learned long ago. The problem was never that I couldn't hear well. It was that others never learned how to listen properly. Thank you for helping teach them. I hope to meet you next month. Lily, your friend." Alexander felt his throat tighten. A warmth stirred in his chest. Not sorrow, but something beautiful. The feeling of watching a seed finally bloom at just the right time. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting golden light on the cafe's polished wood floors. The hum of the espresso machine, the gentle clatter of cups, and soft conversations blended into the new rhythm of a cafe reborn. One rebuilt not just with bricks or training, but with empathy. Sarah and Emma stayed for breakfast, choosing the same corner table. What had once been Emma's quiet refuge on a rainy afternoon 6 weeks earlier. Back then it had been a space of isolation. Today it had become something else entirely. A silent emblem among the staff, affectionately known now as Emma's table. Elena, the new manager, personally brought out their order, offering a warm smile and a few carefully practiced signs. They weren't perfect, but they were sincere. Emma nodded with a small smile, a subtle but clear gesture of appreciation. "I see your effort, and I value it." Around midday, a young mother entered with her toddler. The boy excitedly pointed at the colorful pastry display. After receiving their order, the child looked up, raised his tiny hands, and slowly signed, "Thank you." Elena paused for a heartbeat, then beamed and signed back with heartfelt care. From a distance, Alexander watched it unfold in silence, but he noticed something clearly. Emma sat a little taller as she witnessed the moment. Her eyes no longer held sadness or anger. They reflected something deeper, recognition. A quiet answer that needed no words. Café Lumière, after all its trials, had rediscovered its essence. Not just as a beloved coffee shop, but as a safe place for every kind of soul. The napkin, now hanging behind glass, no longer marked a moment of hurt. It had become a promise, a fragile piece of paper, yet strong enough to turn an entire culture around when someone finally chose to listen with their heart. As Alexander prepared to leave, he paused by Emma's table. She looked up at him, her expression calm like a lake after the storm. Without a prompt, she signed something, swiftly, clearly, confidently. Sarah smiled and translated. She says, "This is now her favorite place in the city." Alexander felt his heart pause for a moment. He nodded, then slowly signed back. "Mine too." Outside, spring sunshine warmed the streets. 6 weeks ago, Alexander had stepped through that same door beneath a gray downpour, burdened with doubt. Today he stepped out lighter, carrying with him the one thing that mattered most, a vital truth. The cafe hadn't been saved by strategy. It had been saved by something far simpler. Returning to the core value he had first learned from a young girl, a girl he had once called daughter, and now the world called an inspiration. That evening, during their weekly video call, Alexander would tell Lily about the sunny morning, about the renewed partnership with the Richardson School, and how her story was still creating ripples, growing into waves of change. But most importantly, he would thank her for teaching him the lesson the whole world needs to remember. The problem was never that you couldn't hear. The problem was that no one ever learned how to listen. The napkin on the wall wasn't just memorabilia. It was a manifesto, a reminder, and an invitation. Observe, sometimes kindness really is the loudest voice.